Emily sat quietly on a bench at the crowded train station. It was a late afternoon, and the golden sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows, casting a soft glow over the busy station. People rushed to and from their trains, voices echoing all around her. She watched them, but none of it seemed to matter much to her. The noise, the movement, the rush, it all felt distant, like a world she no longer belonged to. For the last few years, since the death of her husband, Emily had felt a deep emptiness that no one and nothing seemed to fill. Her dreams had once been so clear. She had imagined a life full of joy, children running around, a family gathered at the dinner table. But after her husband passed away unexpectedly, everything changed. Emily had tried to fill the void. She had tried to start again, to heal, but nothing seemed to work. She had always wanted children, but that dream had been taken from her too. She had been told she was infertile after several doctor's visits. The chances of having a child naturally were slim to none. The years since then had been hard. Emily had tried fertility treatments, but each one ended in disappointment. There were moments when she would allow herself to imagine what it might be like to hold a child in her arms, to care for them, to love them. But then the reality would hit and the sadness would return. She had tried to push those thoughts aside, but some days it was almost impossible. Today was one of those days. Emily sighed and closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the station wash over her. She was tired of fighting, tired of hoping. But as she sat there, something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, two small voices broke through her thoughts. "Excuse me, lady," came a young boy's voice, soft but clear. "Are you my mommy?" Startled, Emily opened her eyes and looked down at the two children standing before her. They were twins, a boy and a girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old. They were small, their faces covered in dirt and their clothes tattered and worn. The boy's hair was messy, sticking up in all directions, while the girl's long, unkempt hair was tangled in knots. They both stared at Emily with wide eyes, their expressions a mix of hope and uncertainty. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. She didn't know what to say. The boy was looking at her with such innocence, his small face full of longing. It made her heart ache in a way she didn't expect. She had never met these children before, and she wasn't sure where they had come from or what had brought them to the station. But the sight of them, so fragile and lost, touched something deep inside her. "No," Emily said softly, shaking her head. "I'm not your mommy." The twins looked disappointed, but they didn't walk away. Instead, they stood there just watching her, their little hands clasped together. Emily could see the sadness in their eyes, the confusion. "They didn't seem to understand. Are you sure?" the boy asked, his voice trembling slightly. "You look like a mommy." Emily's heart squeezed in her chest. She could feel the weight of the boy's words. They weren't just asking out of curiosity. They were searching for something they had lost. "I'm sorry," Emily said, trying to offer a comforting smile. "I can't be your mommy, but you can sit with me if you want, until we can find someone to help you." The twins exchanged a quick glance before they hesitantly moved closer, sitting down on the bench beside Emily. The boy, who had spoken first, kept glancing up at her, his eyes searching her face. The girl, too, looked at Emily, her small fingers twisting together nervously. Emily didn't know what to say to them. She wasn't a mother, and she didn't have the answers they were looking for, but she couldn't just send them away. They needed someone, and right now that someone was her. "Are you lost?" Emily asked gently, trying to break the silence. The twins nodded slowly. The boy spoke up again, his voice small and uncertain. "We don't have anywhere to go. We don't have a mommy or a daddy. We ran away from the orphanage." The words hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. Orphanage. These children were orphans. They had no family, no home. Emily had heard stories of orphanages, overcrowded and understaffed, but she had never imagined meeting children who had come from one. It made her feel helpless. These children were just sitting here, alone, abandoned in a busy train station without anyone to care for them. It seemed impossible. "Why did you run away?" Emily asked, her voice soft, trying to understand their story. The boy shrugged. "The orphanage is scary. It's crowded and we don't get enough food. The people there, they don't really care about us. We wanted to find our mommy or daddy. We thought maybe you could be our mommy." The girl, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up in a voice that was almost a whisper. "We want someone to take care of us. Someone who will love us." Emily's heart broke. She could see it in their eyes, the deep longing, the need for love and security. They were so young, and yet they had already experienced so much pain. It was hard to imagine how a child could go through life without the love of a parent, without someone to care for them. "I'm so sorry," Emily said softly, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. She wanted to tell them that everything would be okay, that they would find someone to take care of them, but she couldn't make any promises. The truth was, she didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how to help them. But in that moment, something stirred inside her, a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. She wanted to help. She wanted to do something, anything, to make sure these children weren't alone. "I'll stay with you until someone comes," Emily said, her voice steady. "We'll figure this out together." The twins looked at her, their faces lighting up with a small spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. Emily knew she couldn't change their lives overnight, but at least she could offer them comfort for now. As the minutes passed, the station around them continued to buzz with activity. But for Emily, the world seemed to fade away. It was just her and the twins, and in that moment, she felt an unexpected connection, a feeling she hadn't had in years. These children, though not hers by birth, had awakened something inside her, something she hadn't even realized she had been missing. The noise of the station didn't matter anymore. The rushing trains, the hurried footsteps, it all faded into the background. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt needed. And that, more than anything, made her heart swell with something she hadn't felt in years: hope. As Emily sat on the bench, the twins nestled beside her, their small bodies pressed against hers for comfort. The station around them was still busy, with people hurrying to catch trains, others talking loudly on their phones, and a few hurriedly sipping coffee from paper cups. But for Emily, it all felt distant, as if the noise and chaos were happening in a world far away. All her attention was on the two little lives beside her, Max and Mia. The boy, Max, had his legs crossed under him and was clutching a worn-out stuffed bear that looked like it had been well-loved for many years. Mia, his twin sister, sat with her hands in her lap, looking up at Emily with big, searching eyes. The twins were small for their age, with dirt streaked across their faces and their clothes in desperate need of washing. Their shoes were falling apart and their hair looked as if it had been tangled for days. Yet despite their rough appearance, there was something incredibly endearing about them. They were just children, children who had lost so much. Emily's mind was swirling with questions. Where had these kids come from? Why were they alone at the station? And how had they ended up here, running away from an orphanage? The more she looked at them, the more she felt a deep sense of sadness and compassion well up inside her. These children were so young and yet had already experienced pain and loss beyond anything she could imagine. Max, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly spoke up again. His voice was soft, but there was a tone of sadness in it, as though he was too used to being let down. "We don't really have anyone. The people at the orphanage don't care about us. They just make us sleep in big rooms with lots of other kids. Sometimes we don't even get enough food. It feels like no one even notices us there." Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she listened. She had always heard about overcrowded orphanages, but hearing the story from the children's mouths made her heart break. The world, it seemed, had failed these innocent little ones. They were lost, both in the world and in life, and Emily could only imagine what it must have been like for them, day after day, living in a place where they were just another face in the crowd. No one to care for them, no one to hold them at night and tell them everything would be okay. Mia, the little girl, reached up and tugged at Emily's sleeve. "Are you sure you're not our mommy?" Her voice trembled as she asked the question again, almost as though she couldn't believe it. "We don't have one. We only have each other." Emily looked at Mia's face and saw the desperation there. It was like the little girl was holding on to a thread of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, Emily could be the answer to all their problems. Emily felt the weight of that hope on her shoulders. What could she say to that? How could she explain to this little girl that she wasn't her mother, when Mia was looking at her as though she had found the one person who might care enough to take them in? "I'm not your mommy, sweetheart," Emily said softly, but her voice was steady. "But I care about you. I really do. And I will help you however I can. You're not alone, not anymore." The words were simple, but to Emily they felt like a promise. She didn't have the answers. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that she couldn't just leave them there, alone in the station. The world might have let them down, but she wasn't going to. Max looked up at her with wide eyes, his expression one of confusion mixed with a faint hope. "You're going to help us?" he asked. "You're going to make sure we're okay?" Emily nodded, her heart heavy but full of determination. "Yes, I'll help you. I won't let anything bad happen to you." For a moment, the twins were quiet, just taking in her words. Emily could see the relief beginning to settle in their faces, as if a weight had been lifted from their small shoulders. They didn't have to worry anymore, not for now at least. Emily could see the trust beginning to grow between them, a silent understanding that she was someone they could rely on. But as much as she wanted to give them the comfort they so desperately needed, Emily knew there was so much more they needed than just a kind word. They needed real help, someone who could care for them, a safe place to live, food, clothes, and perhaps most of all, love. Emily wasn't sure she could provide all that on her own. She wasn't a mother, and she didn't have the resources to adopt them. But at that moment she knew that she couldn't just send them back to the orphanage. She had to do something. "Do you want to tell me more about the orphanage?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice calm. She wanted to understand what these children had been through. Mia nodded slowly, her little face serious. "The orphanage is big and scary," she said quietly. "There are so many kids, and sometimes we get in trouble if we make noise. The people there, they don't listen to us. They don't really care about what we need. And sometimes we don't even get enough food," Max added. "They don't play with us either. They just give us our meals and send us to bed. We don't get to do anything fun. We just sit there all day waiting for someone to notice us." The words cut into Emily like a knife. She knew that orphanages could be underfunded and overcrowded. But hearing it directly from the children made it all feel so much more real. The loneliness and neglect they felt were impossible to ignore. How could a child grow up in an environment like that? How could anyone just sit back and let children suffer in silence like this? "Do you want to go back there?" Emily asked, even though she already knew the answer. The twins shook their heads at the same time, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and sadness. "No," Mia whispered. "We don't want to go back." Emily nodded, understanding. There was no way she could send them back there. She couldn't imagine the pain they would feel if they were returned to that place. But the reality was, Emily didn't know where to take them. She didn't know what the next step would be, or how to make sure they were safe. As Emily sat there, trying to think of what to do, she suddenly realized that she wasn't alone in this. She could feel something stirring within her. She might not be able to give them a home, but she could make sure they didn't go back to the orphanage. She could find someone who could help them. She wasn't sure who, but she knew that she wouldn't rest until she found a solution. "Don't worry," Emily said quietly, her voice firm with determination. "I'll find a way to help you. I'll make sure you're okay." The twins looked up at her again, their faces filled with hope. Mia smiled, a small but genuine smile, and for the first time since they had met, Emily felt as if there was a way forward. For these two children, this small act of kindness, this promise to help them, was everything. It was the first time in a long while that they had someone who seemed to care. It wasn't much, but to them it was more than they had ever had. As Emily sat with the twins, holding them close for comfort, she knew that whatever happened next, she would be there for them. She didn't know how she could help them, but she was determined to try. The road ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let these children face the world alone. As Emily sat with the twins on the bench, comforting them with her presence, she couldn't help but notice how the station around them continued with its usual bustle. People hurried to and from trains, some with briefcases, some with children, and others lost in their own worlds. The noise and movement seemed like a blur, a background to the moment that had suddenly become so important. The twins, who had been clinging to her for comfort, were now more relaxed, their tiny bodies leaning against hers as they sat together, still uncertain but comforted by her words. Emily's thoughts were interrupted when she noticed a man walking past them. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit with a briefcase in his hand, his face serious but tired. He seemed to be in a hurry, his steps quick and purposeful, as though he had somewhere important to be. But when he saw the twins sitting with Emily, his pace slowed. He stopped in front of them, glancing down with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Emily didn't recognize him, but he looked vaguely familiar. Perhaps he was someone who worked at the station or lived nearby. He paused for a moment, standing just a few feet from them. "Are you all right?" the man asked, his voice low but kind. His eyes scanned the twins who looked up at him, their faces still smeared with dirt, their clothes torn and faded. Max, the little boy, looked up at the stranger with wide eyes, a mix of curiosity and hope. "Are you our daddy?" he asked innocently, his voice full of the longing that Emily had heard in his words before. Mia, sitting quietly beside him, echoed the question. "Are you our daddy?" The question hung in the air, soft and simple, but it seemed to stop time. The man stood frozen for a moment, his eyes wide with surprise. It was clear he wasn't expecting such a question, but his expression softened almost immediately. Emily could see the emotion flicker across his face as he knelt down slowly, his eyes now level with the twins. He gave them a gentle, thoughtful smile, but it didn't reach his eyes entirely. "Why would you ask that?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle but with a hint of sadness. He looked from Max to Mia, then back to Emily, as if unsure how to respond. There was something in his gaze that made Emily wonder if he was in some kind of emotional pain too, something hidden just beneath the surface. Max, ever the straightforward child, responded with a simple honesty that tugged at Emily's heart. "We don't have a mommy or daddy. We're alone. Are you our daddy?" Mia, who had been silent, now joined in, her voice soft but filled with an emotion that was too heavy for her small frame. "We want someone to take care of us," she whispered, her eyes looking up at the man as though he were the answer to all their unspoken fears. The man's face fell slightly as he processed their words. Emily could see the deep pain in his expression, and it made her wonder what was going on in his mind. He had not expected this, no one could have. The twins weren't just asking about a parent. They were searching for a lifeline, someone who could give them the love and security they had never truly known. For a few moments, there was only silence. The man looked down at the twins, his face softening as if something deep inside him had been touched by their words. Then he looked at Emily. She couldn't tell what he was thinking, but his gaze was full of an emotion she couldn't quite place. Finally, after what felt like a long pause, he spoke again. "I'm sorry, but I'm not your daddy." His voice was thick with emotion, but it didn't feel like rejection. It felt like a kind of sadness, like he understood more than he was willing to let on. "But I can't be the one to give you what you need." His voice broke a little as he spoke, and Emily could see the weight of those words in his eyes. The twins seemed to absorb his words, but there was no sign of the disappointment that Emily had expected. They were silent for a moment, their faces showing a quiet acceptance as if they had known deep down that their search for a parent might never have an easy answer. But there was something else there too, an understanding, a realization that perhaps even though he wasn't their father, there was still a connection between them. "Are you sure?" Max asked again, his voice trembling just a little. "You look like a daddy. You look like someone who could take care of us." Mia nodded softly beside him, her little hand clutching the worn stuffed bear she had carried with her. "We just need someone to take care of us," she said quietly. "We just want to be safe." The man let out a deep breath, a sigh that seemed to carry with it the weight of unspoken emotions. Emily watched him closely. She could tell that this moment was hard for him. Whatever he had been through, whatever loss he had experienced, it was as if the question from the twins had stirred something deep inside him, a longing for something he thought he could never have. "I would love to be the kind of person you're looking for," he said softly, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I can't be your daddy." His words were kind, but the sorrow in his eyes was clear. "I've lost too much myself. I'm not in a place to take care of anyone else right now." Emily could hear the pain in his voice, the way his words faltered. She couldn't help but feel sympathy for him. He wasn't rejecting the twins because he didn't care, quite the opposite. He was telling them the truth, a truth that was painful but honest. But his words didn't seem to break the twins. Instead, they just looked at him for a moment longer, their faces unreadable. Emily saw the connection between them. The man was no longer just a stranger to the children. Something had shifted in that short exchange. Even though he hadn't given them the answer they had hoped for, there was something else there, a kind of unspoken understanding. The man stood up slowly, taking a step back. "I'm sorry, I really am," he said, his voice soft but filled with regret. "But I hope you find what you're looking for." And with that he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The twins watched him go, their faces still uncertain but somehow calmer. It was as if they had known, deep down, that their search for a father wasn't about finding someone who fit a certain image. It was about finding someone who would care for them, someone who would love them the way they had always dreamed. After the man left, Emily looked at the twins, her heart heavy with the knowledge that their journey was far from over. They still had no one, no family to take them in, and while she wanted to be that for them, she knew that there were many things she couldn't give them on her own, but there was something inside her that refused to let them down. She would figure out a way. She had to. "Let's find someone who can help," Emily said softly, her voice full of determination. "I promise you we won't give up." The twins nodded, their eyes meeting hers. They didn't have all the answers yet, but they had something they hadn't had before. Hope. And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt that same hope flicker inside her. She might not be able to give them everything they needed, but she wasn't going to let them walk this journey alone. Not now, not ever. The station was as busy as ever, but Emily didn't seem to notice the rushing people or the trains pulling in and out. Her focus was entirely on the twins beside her, who had settled into a quiet but uneasy silence. Max, the boy, was holding his stuffed bear close to his chest, and Mia, the girl, was staring down at her shoes, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap. They were both lost in their thoughts, as if trying to process everything that had happened so far. Meeting Emily, the stranger in the station, and the promise of help that hadn't yet come to fruition. Emily felt a deep sympathy for them. They were so young, yet their lives had already been filled with so much hardship. As she sat there trying to think of what to do next, she couldn't help but wonder how much longer they would be forced to wait for someone to step in and help them. Her heart ached for the twins, knowing that they deserved a better life, a life filled with care and love, not the neglect and fear they had experienced. As Emily thought, the sound of footsteps drew her attention. She looked up to see a familiar face approaching. It was the man who had stopped earlier, the one who had spoken to the twins and then walked away. He was holding a phone in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. He glanced over at Emily, then toward the twins, his face still holding an expression of sadness and regret. He seemed to be in a hurry, but when he saw them sitting there, he stopped again, this time with a hesitant look in his eyes. Emily was surprised to see him return. She had expected him to disappear into the crowd, but there he was, standing before her once more. "Excuse me," the man said softly, his voice unsure. He cleared his throat before continuing, his eyes briefly meeting Emily's. I just wanted to apologize. I didn't mean to sound cold earlier. It's just that I've been through a lot, and I didn't know what to say. I don't have the right to just step in and offer something I'm not sure I can give." Emily could see the struggle in his eyes. He wasn't trying to be distant or unkind. He was just carrying a burden that weighed heavily on him. His words were not about rejection, but about a deep personal conflict. It was as if he had been carrying pain for so long that it made it difficult to reach out, to open up, even to children who clearly needed someone. The man paused for a moment, looking at the twins with a kind of sadness that seemed to mirror their own. Max and Mia, who had been watching him closely, were silent, their expressions unsure. It was clear that they still remembered his previous words, and the small hope they had built up from that brief interaction was now flickering in their eyes. "I've thought about it," the man continued, his voice softer now. "Maybe I can help you in some way, even if I'm not your daddy. I don't know if I'm the answer you're looking for, but maybe I can find someone who can help. I don't know much about adoption or foster care, but I'm sure there's something that can be done." Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. She hadn't expected him to come back, let alone offer to help in any way. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. She didn't know this man, and he didn't know her or the twins, but there was something in the way he spoke that made her believe he truly wanted to do what was right. Perhaps it wasn't the grand, perfect solution that the twins needed, but it was something, and that was better than nothing. The man took a seat on the bench across from them, his eyes fixed on the twins. "I don't know what's going to happen," he said quietly, "but I'll do what I can to help you find a safe place. You deserve better than what you've had." Max and Mia looked at each other, and Emily could see that they were both surprised by the man's change of heart. It wasn't the answer they had expected, but it was an answer nonetheless. Emily could see the hope slowly returning to their eyes, a flicker of light in the darkness they had been living in for so long. We don't want to go back to the orphanage. Max said softly, his voice shaking. We don't want to be alone anymore. The man's expression softened and he nodded in understanding. I can't promise you everything right away, he said. But I'll help you find the right people. I'll make some calls, get you in touch with the right services. You won't be alone anymore, I promise. The twins nodded, their faces now filled with a quiet hope. It wasn't much, but it was something they could hold on to. They were no longer in the station alone, waiting for a solution that seemed impossible. There was someone who cared, someone who was willing to take the time to help them. As the man stood up to leave, he turned to Emily. I'll be back soon, he said. I have to make a few calls and gather some information. I'll make sure you're not alone in this. Emily smiled at him, her gratitude clear in her eyes. Thank you, she said quietly. I don't know what to say. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. Don't thank me yet. We still have a long way to go, but we'll figure it out, one step at a time. With that, the man walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Emily sat there for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened in such a short time. The station still felt loud, still felt busy, but now there was a sense of calmness, of hope in the air. She looked at the twins, who were still sitting close to her, their eyes fixed on her with a mix of trust and curiosity. They had been through so much, yet they still had hope. They still believed that things could get better. Emily had promised them that she would help, but now, with the man's offer to assist, it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't doing this alone anymore, and neither were the twins. Do you think things will get better? Mia asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiled down at her, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. I think things are already getting better, she said softly, one step at a time. We'll figure this out together. Max nodded, a small, hopeful smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Together, he repeated. For the first time since they had met, Emily truly believed that they would be okay. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be challenges ahead, but she wasn't going to give up on them. Not now, not ever. They had come into her life for a reason, and she would do whatever it took to make sure they were safe, loved and cared for. As the minutes passed, Emily sat quietly with the twins, watching the trains come and go. The noise and rush of the station had faded into the background, and in its place was a sense of quiet hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they weren't alone anymore, and for that Emily was grateful. The days following their conversation with the man were full of uncertainty and quiet hope. Emily couldn't quite believe how quickly everything had shifted. Just a few days ago, she had been sitting alone in that busy train station, her heart heavy with her own struggles. Now she was sitting with two orphan children, trying to find a way to make sure they had a chance at a better life. And for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't feel quite as alone anymore. Emily was still overwhelmed by the responsibility she felt for the twins, Max and Mia. She knew she couldn't take them home with her. Her apartment wasn't set up for children, and she wasn't equipped to give them the care they needed. But the thought of them going back to the orphanage was unbearable. The memories of their sad faces, their fear, their desperate hope for a parent haunted her. She couldn't let that happen. The man who had promised to help, whose name was Thomas, kept his word. He called her the next day, just like he said he would. I've made some calls, he told her over the phone. I've spoken to a social worker. They're willing to meet with you and the kids. We've got a meeting scheduled for tomorrow. His voice sounded reassuring, but Emily could still hear a trace of uncertainty there. It was clear that even he didn't know how things would play out, but he was doing everything he could. Emily passed the news on to the twins, and she saw a flicker of hope in their eyes again. Tomorrow? Max asked, his voice filled with excitement. Does that mean we'll get a new home? Emily smiled softly. I don't know yet, but it's a step in the right direction. We have to take things one step at a time. The twins nodded, trying to stay hopeful. Emily couldn't help but admire their strength. They had been through so much, and yet they still clung to the belief that things could get better. It made her realize how much she had taken her own safety and security for granted. These children didn't have a mother or father to protect them, to care for them, but they still trusted that someone would step in and help. It made Emily feel a responsibility to them that went beyond simple sympathy. It was a responsibility to do everything in her power to make sure they had a chance at the life they deserved. The next day, they went to the social worker's office. The building was a simple, unassuming place, nothing like the busy, intimidating government offices Emily had been to in the past. It was a quiet building tucked away in a corner of the city, and when they entered, the air felt calm, almost peaceful. Emily could tell the twins were nervous. They both fidgeted, their small hands gripping each other's tightly, but there was also a sense of curiosity in their eyes. They didn't know what was going to happen, but they trusted Emily and Thomas, and that was enough to help them feel safe for the moment. The social worker, a woman named Linda, greeted them with a warm smile. She was in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She made them feel at ease right away, guiding them into her office with a welcoming smile. "I know this is all very new and probably a bit scary," Linda said, her voice soft and reassuring. "But I'm here to listen, to help however I can. You're not alone in this." The twins looked up at Linda, still unsure, but Emily could see the relief in their faces. They didn't know what this meeting would bring, but they knew they were in good hands. They weren't just being shuffled through a system. They were being treated as individuals with their own needs, their own desires. For the first time in a long time, they had someone who cared about what happened to them. Linda spoke to them gently, asking them about their lives, their experiences, and their feelings. The twins were hesitant at first, unsure of how much to share, but with Emily and Thomas sitting beside them, they began to open up. Mia spoke quietly about the fear she had felt in the orphanage, about the loneliness that seemed to never go away. Max talked about the time he had spent waiting for someone to notice him, to see him as more than just another child in a crowded room. Emily could see the pain in their eyes, and it made her heart ache. They were so small, so innocent, yet the world had been so hard on them. Linda listened carefully, her eyes filled with understanding. "It sounds like you two have been through a lot," she said softly. "But I want you to know that there are people who want to help. We want to make sure you have the chance to be happy, to be safe. That's our job, to make sure you're okay." The twins nodded, still uncertain but comforted by Linda's words. Emily couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for this woman who had made them feel heard, who had shown them that someone cared. After the meeting, Linda spoke with Emily and Thomas. "I think the twins have a lot of potential," she said. "But we'll need to assess their situation thoroughly. There are a lot of steps involved in making sure they're placed in a safe and loving home. It's not going to happen overnight, but this is a good start." Thomas, who had been quiet during the meeting, spoke up. "We'll do whatever it takes to help them," he said, his voice firm. "They've been through too much already. They deserve a chance at a real family." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. She had been worried that they would be pushed aside, that the system would fail them as it so often failed children like them. But she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to find a real family, a place where they could grow and feel safe. Over the next few weeks, things began to fall into place. The twins were placed in a temporary foster home, a safe, quiet place where they could finally start to heal. Emily visited them regularly, making sure they knew she was still there, that she hadn't forgotten about them. She watched as the twins slowly began to trust again, as they started to open up to their foster parents and the people around them. They were still scared, still unsure of the future, but they were taking the first steps toward building a new life. Thomas stayed involved too, keeping in touch with Emily and helping in any way he could. He had become a sort of quiet protector for the twins, someone they could rely on even if they didn't fully understand his role in their lives. He hadn't promised to be their daddy, but in a way, he was showing them what it meant to be a responsible, caring adult. One day, about a month after the twins had been placed in the foster home, Emily received a call from Linda. "We've found a family," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "A couple who is looking to adopt. They're perfect for the twins. They've been through all the necessary checks and they're ready to welcome them into their home." Emily's heart raced with both excitement and nervousness. This was it, the moment the twins had been waiting for. It was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The adoption process was still a few weeks away, but Emily could already see the hope in the twins' eyes. They had found a family who would love them, who would care for them and give them the security they had longed for. They weren't orphans anymore. They were part of a family. As Emily looked at Max and Mia, her heart filled with gratitude. The journey had been long, filled with uncertainty, but in the end it had led to something beautiful. They had found their place in the world, and Emily had played a part in helping them get there. She hadn't been able to give them everything they needed, but she had helped them find the people who could. As she watched them play with their new family, Emily realized that sometimes the smallest actions, offering a moment of kindness, making a promise to help, could change someone's entire life. For Max and Mia, the future was bright, and for Emily, it was a reminder that hope was always worth holding on to, no matter how uncertain the road ahead might seem.